Starting recording. There we go. We're live.
Well, welcome all.
Welcome one and all to Torah Topics.
Torah Topics, yes. I was just going to say that. We got the screen share live too, right?
Indeed.
Got the whole Tanakh right here at our mouse click. All right, so what we're doing is looking at Parshat Mishpatim. So what chapter was that? Around 20 or so? 21?
21.
I think it's 21, yeah. Right.
I know those were definitely part of it, yeah.
So the first thing to say, just kind of to open this up, is since the very beginning in the Bereshit bara, the beginning in the Genesis, Bereshit bara is the opening words of the Torah in the beginning of creating. until now, or if you use, traditional vernacular, in the beginning God created, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since then until now, this is like the first really big dive entry into actual mitzvot.
So you're saying that,
Commands.
the first focus on the different commandments that God gives man since the story of the creation of all things.
Right. Yeah, we've had the whole creation. We talked about the the flood. We went to that, from there to the Tower of Babel, right? We went from there to Avram, to the changing to Avraham, to the Yitzchak, to Yaakov, to the 12 sons of Yaakov, to the going down to Mitzrayim, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the coming out of Mitzrayim, the plagues, and now we're, actually getting into what there's a certain word I'm trying to find. Actual Torah, right? This is actual Torah. These are actual instructions dealing with legal principles.
So like the actual words of God himself?
Yes, and not only this, right? The actual words of God himself, but also this really interesting thing where once you understand this word doesn't have bad connotation, these are actual legitimate, precepts and laws for how to live.
Mm-hmm.
Laws. Rules, if you don't like the word law.
Well, we've spoken before about how it's translated like teaching, or it has more like a teaching feel.
So the very opening passage, Ve'ele HaMishpatim, these are the Mishpatim, and look at that. This translation does use rules. See that? These are the rules that you shall set before them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in agreement with what was said just a few seconds ago. And sometimes English really does fail to get the real meaning across. Law is not a bad word once you understand that it's not something you get under. And
right.
it's like you're ailing and you have a spiritual trouble because you got under it. Once you understand that's fallacy and that's incorrect thinking, then law is really a pretty good word. But technically, the Torah doesn't call these. It doesn't call them Torah. It doesn't call them instructions. It doesn't call them statutes. There's another word that means statute, but it doesn't. Mishpatim. So the idea of Mishpatim is just conduct.
So this is
just righteous conduct, right?
If I'm understanding this correctly, then the Mishpatim is like in the New Testament, that's what was known as the way.
Well,
yeah,
we would have to. That would be a derech. That'd be a path. So it's what characterizes that way, like to do justly, if that makes sense. Justly,
Right.
right? You can find this word in that. There are two different verses, one in Micah and one at the end of Sefer Devarim, Deuteronomy. What does the Elohim expect from you, right? Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly before God, before the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So the do justly part is this word. So how are you going to do justly? The question is, or we want to put out, and this is kind of the real big reason why there's what we call it Torah time. How would you call this? The program again?
Torah Topics.
Torah Topics. Why are you doing Torah Topics? Is because how are you going to know how to do justly unless you know what these rules are, right?
Right. So like these are kind of like the blueprints for living a just life. And
They
without
are the blueprints. Yeah, I'll go ahead and
how
go.
are you
I forgot.
how are you going to structure your life around justice if you don't understand the
The
blueprint?
ways of justice, right? That's the connection to the way,
Yeah,
right?
early on, Daniel, we would be having these conversations, and I would, in church my whole life, whatever you want to call it. All was bad. That's all I've ever been taught. And he said something one time that really stuck with me, which was, how do you decide what's right and what's wrong? It was so simple. So simple.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's
That is
like, well, you innately should know what's right?
it's a
But
Jewish, sure, exactly. That's actually a really important. If you look at this from the Jewish side, they will make that point about Christians, or the Christians would not know how to identify what is a sin. They would know technically. And if sin is the transgression of these precepts, then it's correct. I mean, strictly speaking, that is a correct statement.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're going to be willfully ignorant, if you're going to be ignorant of the very thing that defines what a sin is and what righteousness is, or a sin is and is not, then how would you know the difference?
yeah, and I had never thought about it in those terms before, but that is one of the things in the very beginning that really set me also on this path.
Yeah, it's good, good for you, because it's a realization that there's more to it than our own perception or feelings.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
beyond that, sorry, you go, Carrie, and then I'll go.
I was just gonna say, they say, it's a, oh, I'll write my word on your heart, blah blah blah. So we don't need to read. You don't need to know what it actually says in the Old Testament because it's on your heart. So whatever you feel is then correct.
If you did not have a sin nature, that would be correct. That would be a legitimate way to guide your steps.
Yeah.
That's
Would be.
kind of where I was going to go, is that, scripture itself says the heart of man is exceedingly wicked. And I know people, Carrie knows people who know the way, who know what's right and wrong, but are justifying things that they're doing based on, well, I can also look to these scriptures that are all about mercy, and justice no longer really matters. What's right and wrong is very fluid, but it's not. It was never fluid. There is a right and there is a wrong, and in the name of justice, those standards will continue to exist, because without justice, then you can't really have mercy, because they rely on each other.
Right, and technically, in an esoteric sense, there's no way to actually bring tzedakah and mishpat, which are the words like righteousness and justice, into the world without the word and the clear like instruction from heaven, there, from Shemayim, from Elohim. There isn't any way to do it. It's really the exclusive way. And that's why it's given so much importance in the Tanakh.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we look at, I'm thinking of the last chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. Right?
The purpose of man is to know and do the will of God.
Yeah, right. Yes. Let me see if I can find. Here it
I
is.
just passed it. There it is. Here's the sum of man.
It says, "Sof davar hakol," the end of absolutely everything that there is. Right? These words mean Yerah, which means to revere or respect or have fear Elohim, in the sense of fear of God. Right?
Right.
It doesn't mean frightful terror, fear. It means respect and understanding, glory and honor.
Mm-hmm.
It says his mitzvot, his commandments, guard or keep, because that is all that there is for a person to do. And they translate that as this applies to all humanity or all mankind. And then it goes on and talks about every action Elohim will bring before judgment. And this mishpat right here is the same root word that we're studying. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to bring every action under scrutiny under the ways of mishpat. Or these, if we go back to our verse, it says
all of our actions are going to be contrasted with the
correct.
Mishpatim.
Right. Yeah, because in other words, the actions are going to be evaluated, or you can say assessed, whatever word you like, but that's what this Kiet kol ma'aseha Elohim yavo ve'mishpat, or yavi. So this means that every action Elohim will bring under the scrutiny of absolute justice. That's what this verse is saying.
Yeah.
That God will call every creature to account for everything unknown. I don't know where they get that. Everything unknown. And then they're saying, or all their conduct, whether it's good or bad, right? And the theme that we've been opening our discussion with is, how does a believer know what's good from what's not good, what's good from bad? When the whole point of the fall of Adam and Chava, and Adam and Eve, was to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Mm-hmm. So, in other words, the two are like indistinguishable. That's really what that means. It's like a prophetic, it's like a picture of, a representation of, without some kind of divine guidance, there is an inability to discern right from wrong. That's what that means. In other words, to eat from that tree, in an esoteric sense.
Right.
Because you're joined to righteousness and you're joined to evil at the same time. So now your mission in life is to distinguish. How are you going to do that?
Well, the church would say you just follow your heart.
Right, but a verse was quoted moments ago about the heart is in some kind of a case, and who can know how bad this is? You remember the verse?
Then they would rebuttal with, well, that was a stony heart that God removed and replaced with a heart of flesh. And on the argument would go.
Right, it goes like that. But somehow the Holy Spirit elevates a person to realize that, well, I'm not really paying any attention to the Hebrew calendar. Elohim said, these are my moedim, these are my appointed times. How come I'm not doing them? There's a passage in Zechariah 14, Zechariah 14, that says that all the nations go up to Jerusalem every year to keep the Feast of Tabernacles.
Well, beyond the prophecies that we see of how the law is going to continue to be observed and the feasts and festivals will continue to be observed in the future, if you just step back and realize, if God said that these standards are the right way to live to his people, then why is it that when we have the Mashiach, those standards are no longer right? Is it like a double standard? Or did God maybe lie to them? Or maybe God told them the truth and lied to us? Or maybe we simply don't really understand what the hell we're talking about.
All good points. Right. So you have to think about and reflect on exactly who are you following? Who are you following in that case?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can show from the New Testament that Yeshua is following the Hebrew Bible. He's not following some other voice.
When the allegory of the rich man and Lazarus was given by Jesus.
Yeah, let's look at that. Oh, that's a good one. Yes.
Yeah, and the rich man is in, the pits of hell, and he's like, just let me go to my brothers and warn them. And he was told, they have the prophets and Moses just as well as you. And if they won't listen to them, then they won't listen to you, even if you're raised from the dead, or something to that effect.
Actually, that's a really relevant, super important passage and point that you're making.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm making it, because,
This is not.
You missing your soft?
Yeah, I'll probably have it ready for next week, but I just don't have it on this computer yet.
Yeah. I found, on a side note, there's this software that I found that works on a laptop. It's a Windows laptop called The Word, and it's similar to BibleWorks. You download different modules, and you can get the different codexes and the original Hebrew. I forget what it's called, the Masoretic text, something or other. But there's supposedly a way to get it on the Macintosh, but I can't seem to get it there. Like, it's downloaded and installed, but when I click to open it, it'll open briefly, but before the window comes onto the screen, it crashes on itself. It's really annoying.
I understand. Right. We will resolve these technical difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
Was it supposed to run on Mac?
It's
off the topic.
I know it's off topic, but it was designed for Windows, and then they had one that was like rewritten for Mac or something. But if you had a Macintosh with an operating system of, I think it was Mountain Lion or higher, you had to download this X Quartz or something for it to be able to run. And so I did that, and it gets it to where you're able to open it, but then it crashes right away. So
it's disappointing. It's disappointing. Yeah, it's a technical problem.
Yeah.
We can discuss some. There are a couple of things I'm aware of. We'll try to stay on point with this because that would be quite a, what do you call it, a digression.
Yeah.
This story is relevant. It's quite relevant. I don't know whether to read the whole thing.
Let's read it because I'm actually not familiar with it.
All right, so go ahead. You want to do it or have Daniel do it? I mean, I'm willing to do it, but I think you're good at
I'll do it.
Okay. There was a rich man dressed in purple, right?
Dramatize it.
Right.
I'll go. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried.
Let me stop a second. So we'll put this in context. What was that word you used? Allegory? This is like a parable. This is a Yeshua parable is what this is. It's like a story that has a moral to it. Okay. Or a lesson. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. And now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.
All right. So the first question is,
Okay.
you could ask it like, if you went by feelings, I mean, it looks like this person making this request, the rich man, dressed in purple and fine linen, lived luxurious. I'm sure he was feeling good about his own life.
Yeah, I bet. Yes.
Know what I mean? So if you use this as a guide, his feelings being the guide, what can you say, right? And then there's no mention of like, well, when you in your life you didn't go by your feelings the right way. You are not led of the Spirit and have a whatever written on your heart. I mean, none of that stuff's coming up here in this whole story.
Yeah.
Right.
See
I'd
that?
say he probably did live according to his heart. And look where he ends up.
Yeah, really.
That's really the point of the story. Really.
Wow.
Feel like do what makes you happy.
Right, you can take it that far. This is a real good example of why it is a dangerous thing to rely on feelings in that sense for spiritual matters, for the intrinsic rightness or wrongness of anything. This is a good story for that part of it. So the other part about this story, which was your point just a few moments ago, was what standard is lifted up in this story? You know,
Moses and the prophets.
Moses and the prophets. So we go back to our passage here, in Sefer Shemot, Exodus chapter 21. These are the Mishpatim. These are the you could say like legal guidelines or their rules is not bad. It's very hard to translate that word, but ways to behave justly is the way I said it before.
I feel like a good way to look at it would be the code by which you are to live.
Hey, I like that. So the word code would be good.
Yeah.
This is the framework of legal code that you should put before them. And that's really what this verse is saying, right? And if you look at the New Testament here in the words of Yeshua, now this is before any kind of a stuff. They came in later with epistles and being looked at with different letters and taken them maybe out of context with opinions and letters and epistles and building cathedral doctrines out of these epistles. This is like the pure thing. This is the point from earlier, is that there's an aspect of the Yeshua of the New Testament who is pointing people to the Torah. And this is a good verse. This is a good example. Matthew 5 is another good example. We've looked at other examples.
Before we move on, I've got a comment about the last verse, where I feel like this is used often to kind of contrast the church versus everyone else, because the church is the one who believes Jesus who rose from the dead. But when they make that connection, that's one of those half-truths, because they're not believing Moses and the prophets.
That's another part of this I wasn't even going to bring out. If they,
I feel like it's an important point to bring out, though. So it's
right. So if you were any kind of a church or denomination or any kind of, I don't know, faith movement of any kind, and all you did was talk about rising from the dead, then according to this verse, it's not really that convincing. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes, that was a point. I don't know if that's what you're trying to say, but if all you did was talk about right now.
Right. Well, all I'm really trying to point out is that the church, their main prerogative is to share, by their own standard, is to share the salvation that God has given in Jesus from his rising from the dead with.
Correct.
World.
Yes.
But
right.
Do that by divorcing the Mashiach from Moses and the prophets, which you can't do, because he is the fulfillment now.
Right. That's exactly right. We are saying precisely the same thing, just with slightly different words.
Right.
I was just looking at it. If you look at this the literal meaning of this passage right here. So if you are a church only focusing on this part, the rising from the dead part, then and you are omitting, skipping over, leaving out whatever Moses and the prophets, that's missing something. You can take it take it at that, because I think it's missing something, which is why we're doing this, to fill in the missing piece, the missing part of it.
Indeed.
Okay, so what this does is this is starting out. It's very interesting that it commences with proper behavior. What do you call it? A code of behavior, living, conduct for handling a Hebrew servant. It's very interesting. It's very interesting because of that principle we talked about just before the program started, that there's a province or a space that a man is appointed by Hashem to direct and run that. That's your space. And what happens here with this servitude is it's like violated. It's not really working right. Hashem said, "These are my servants." In another passage, that's why the term is not allowed to be more than 6 years.
Right. And it's only up to the fixed year of Jubilee. So if they come in on year number 4, then they only work and 2 years and then they're freed, right?
Right.
Right.
Yes. Yes. That's another one. There's a very interesting thing to say about verse 6. So some people have a problem in their soul. There's something wrong. There's something wrong with their soul, and they want to do this. They want to say, "I love my master. I love my master. I love being a slave." In that case, there's a way to do it, but it takes some kind of act of volition on the part of the Hebrew slave that wants to remain being a slave, right? So, according to our discussion earlier, and then even according to just more or less common sense, there's something wrong with this person. Anyway, this is the famous passage of you put the master shall pierce his ear with an awl, some kind of a poker instrument, and he shall be brought to the door of the doorpost and poke a hole in his ear.
Mhm.
So that's some kind of a outward sign that this person's really content to have a master. So
I
don't know if
think
there's more
I
to say
think
about that, but
because the one who is owner of the slave, he has to care not only for him but also for the guy's family.
right.
As he is a slave.
Yes, there
So
are.
I can see how some people would look at that and say that's a better existence than trying to make it on my own. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that's happening in this, and we have the whole section about the Hebrew slave, and that's really the word. It's slave. I mean, they're the English word slave corresponds to the status on what these people are at that time. It says, "Then he shall remain his master's slave for life." See that? And yes, there are codes here or rules for how to set them free, dealing with the property, dealing with family members, and so on.
Yeah.
Then it switches to a lot of other stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
I would point out that there is a slight variation between the usage of the word slave here and the usage of the word slave in today's vernacular. I feel like this is, as far as the Hebrew slave anyways, this is really more of an indentured servitude, right? So
Correct. It is technically, it's a contractual servitude. Correct. Like, and that word is a better word.
it's
You're
like
an
if someone goes
indentured.
bankrupt or something and they owe a lot of money and the Sanhedrin court comes to them and says you have to pay, and the guy's
Yeah.
like, I have no money, I cannot pay, and they are then able to sell that individual to someone for the revenue to pay his debts. And that's an indentured servitude type situation. That's largely what this is kind of going over.
Yeah,
That
it is.
other situations where someone sells themselves into slavery. So, and again, the Hebrews were not intended to be slaves outside of Misr, Egypt, and so that's why God put that time limit of no greater than 6 years on it,
Correct.
unless they, pierce their ear and proclaim servitude to their master for the rest of their life.
Right. And in that case, yep, there's something not right in the soul. That was my point.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we move on to other topics, a whole kind of different subjects. And there's really quite a bit in this parsha for different legal precepts that, in a sense, really do. It's like this is like forming. It's the basis of the common law.
Yes. Which is, if you remember last week, we were discussing the possibility of discussing the laws of Israel today, and maybe we can do that later on. But it just kind of seems like that's a very nice coincidence that we would be doing that possibly on the same weekend that we're discussing the law of Moses itself.
You're talking about the modern state of Israel and the laws there?
Yeah, remember we were discussing the prospect of discussing the Constitution of modern Israel?
That's right. Well, what that was about the ingathering of the exiles. Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't find that yet. That's still a to-do.
Okay. Well, my thinking was if we could contrast what we're going over here with what they have going on, that would be an interesting podcast at some point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be an interesting podcast.
Because I know they're not following this standard because there's you got all kinds of interest involved there. But
no, it's not. It's acting more like just a secular nation, imported maybe from the Eurozone or maybe to Eastern Europe or something like that. That's what it acts like. Yes, as far as the standards that are in the Knesset.
Yeah.
So
okay.
yeah, we can work on that. What else did I want to say? What should we say about this?
Can I read my favorite one?
Yes, what's yours?
My favorite one was 21 about the 20. Well, it's chapter 22, 21, but in this parasha. Here's the one about the orphans. It says you are not to abuse any widow or orphan. If you do abuse them in any way and they cry to me, I will certainly heed their cry.
I will become upset, is what it says. I will become irate. It does say that. That's the next verse in 23.
I just thought it was cool.
Anger shall blaze forth, and I will put you to the sword. Your own wives shall become widows, and your children orphans.
So what would you call that?
Justice.
Justice. Very good. That's the answer I was looking for. That's because this section of the Torah is dealing with the principle of the codes of behavior. So here's the thing, wisdom would be anytime you have a widow that you come in contact with, an orphan, treat these people with like all total kindness and mercy. That's what this means.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like, never mind.
That's
well,
advice.
there's this.
It's advice, and it's also what I try to do. Yes.
There's this, I don't know, idea. It came up when Mom was here one time about, well, what kind of God just kills people? 2 words like that.
Oh, this type, you mean?
Yeah, like this reading something like that, you can take it 2 different ways. There's a school of thought that might be like, well, why would God try to kill people? Like,
who does he think he is?
So you want the answer to that?
He's God.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying.
I have an answer. What kind of God allows bad people to mistreat widows and orphans and the needy, and these represent a whole class of people who can't defend for themselves, allows these people to be oppressed and does nothing?
Yeah. Well, that was my point. Is I was like, it sounds like you're getting dangerously close to saying something akin to, God, his view of justice is somehow an error, and if that's what you're doing, I'm just going to take a couple steps back, just in case.
But a lot of people do that though.
Yeah, they
A
do.
lot of people do. They don't. This doesn't feel right.
Right.
You know what I mean? Can you notice that? It doesn't feel
Yes.
right that he's talking
You know
about
why?
killing these
You know why?
mean people.
Yes.
The reason is because they don't know the precepts of justice.
Bingo. Correct. Nachon.
So,
Nachon is the correct word. Nachon, which
Mishpatim.
means the Hebrew word nachon means that it's faithful and it's correct.
Mm-hmm.
High fidelity answer. That's it. That's really the reason, is because they're ignorant they're ignorant, and
Yeah.
without the guidance and the capacity to separate holy from unholy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem.
Yep.
It is good advice. There's a widow who lives not far from us, and we come into contact with her out in doing stuff in different ways. And one time she asked me can you help me put this box of stuff in my car? I'm like, yes, ma'am. Anything else you need? True story.
That's
Stuff
awesome.
like that. Yeah, it is. True story.
Yeah.
And it's because of it's that behavior is based on this verse.
Mm-hmm.
So if the Torah enjoins prohibits a certain behavior, then we should endeavor to do the opposite.
Right.
Right. So in other words, to treat harshly or maltreat and people who scam widows, and heaven forbid, right, and do things like that, who try to steal and those kind of things. That's what this verse is referring to. And so what we should do is, I don't know how to say this, with mercy and kindness, absolutely motivated the opposite. And a couple of things have happened, and this is not to draw attention to me or for anything like that, but out of this advice and related counsel, I have done it. And it doesn't matter,
Well,
it's everything from courtesy in a parking lot, to dealing
Right.
in the neighborhood and everything. The widows, you step right up here, ma'am.
what if the
Go
what
ahead.
you're saying is, this is saying, don't mistreat the widows and orphans, and you're saying that to do the opposite, that would mean to ill treat those who have caused people to become widows and orphans. Yeah.
I wouldn't. I'm not saying that. No.
Okay.
When I say do the opposite, all that means is if a behavior is prohibited, which would be to treat badly the needy or an orphan, or especially widows, then
To treat
we
extra well.
should treat it extra well. And the concept is to put distance, right? You can find another verse that says, be distant, be far away from evil.
So, like, you're doing everything you can to be as far away from that fire as you can be, so as to not be burned.
If you want to use fire as the analogy, that is correct. Or you could just say you're doing everything you can to be as far from anything that could even be closely thoughtless.
Okay. Yeah, I was
indifferent,
this,
rude, nothing like that.
Yeah.
I really do want to make this point. It's the passive kind, what do they call them? Omission kinds. You were thoughtless, you were indifferent, you were, too quick, too curt, interrupting, anything like that.
Right.
That's because of this verse. You don't want any of your behavior to even come close to being in that category.
When I thought you were saying what I had brought up, I was going to bring up this the precept about how if you have a roof, you put barriers on top
You have
of
to
your
put
roof.
right.
And there's this idea that Rashi talks about that says if someone is up on a roof and they fall down, then there likely could be a divine reason for that, like that's God's judgment on them. But even so, don't let your roof be the one that happens on.
It is the same esoteric principle, exactly. It's very awesome. I think it's great. Congratulations that you picked up on this, because in an esoteric way, it's the exact same reason that you would not want to have any participation in the so-called negligence or the, I didn't care, I was being indifferent of not having the barrier on your roof, right?
Right.
That you're participating just by that way. You're closer to the blame. You're closer to the center of the evil of it and the trouble, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, it's the same principle on this. You don't want your behavior to even register anywhere close to that. So right. That's why it's advice to. It doesn't matter what she would ask me to do. If I'm capable to do it, I'll do it. Yes.
Right.
I didn't tell her.
You don't want to be that doormat necessarily.
No, we're not telling her the reason. If she asked the reason, I would say because there's a Bible verse that gives instruction about this.
Mm-hmm.
She's not likely to ask, but we do have dealings because it's on the next street over, and she likes the dog.
Yeah.
Oh, cute.
Dog likes her too.
Our dog likes her.
Our dog likes everybody.
It's a good case study. It is a good case study. And
so I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's maximum kindness or chesed. I'm done. We can go with your question.
Well, it's just like a lot of these are what's the word?
Misunderstood?
No, I'm going a different direction. Like, okay, I know not to mistreat widows. All right. I just thought it was cool that God says I'll certainly hear that. I'm going to hear about it.
But there's a secondary. It's like there's a deeper teaching with it. That's all. Your way of approaching it is perfect. That's correct.
Yeah. Well, and there's some that are natural. Like, okay, don't murder someone. All right. But then there's other ones that are this one, do not repeat false rumors. Okay, that seems pretty self-explanatory and easy for us to understand in even our modern culture. But 6 years you are to sow your land with seed and gather in its harvest, but the 7th year you are to let it rest and lie fallow.
Right. Yeah, that's the Shemitah. We just did the Shemitah last year. Did you remember? Did I tell you about that?
No, I don't know what that is.
You could buy land. You could buy land in Israel. And I did it. You could buy a patch of land that was going to be devoted to the land Sabbath. I did it.
That's cool.
And this is again not the direct attention to me. There were a whole lot of people that in Israel and in USA, other places, Jews were doing this. My patch was 4 cubits by 4. It was a 4x4 patch.
Well, in this case, is it every specific 7 years that started at this point right here when these words were brought down? Or is it 7 years from wherever you start sowing your field?
No, it's 7 years on a fixed calendar, and this has been known since the day this ordinance was given. It's on the calendar.
So if we're in the 5th year right now, and I go out and start sowing my fields,
Yeah.
then 2 years from now, it's a rest year.
Correct. It would
Regardless.
not matter when you started. It's it's attached to the calendar, not to your business, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
So, and you're pointing out that it's a little hard to relate to, like, you know, yeah,
Well,
it's
it's
called
just
the land.
going back to that right and wrong, and how do you decide if it's right and wrong? And oh, well, you just know it in your heart. But how are you supposed to know that just in your heart?
Right. So that would be a good message to people who are coming out of, what'd you call it? Churchy thought. Churchy thought, yeah. That this is a good example when the Creator says every seventh year is supposed to be a Sabbath for the land, right? And technically, you can practice that as a precept outside of Israel, but this statute only applies to the land of Israel. Okay, that's why we had to buy land in Israel to fulfill this command. Okay, that's a whole technical discussion right there.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's why we had to acquire land within the borders of Israel to fulfill this, you know,
But why?
policy, the code of this. In order to fulfill the code that's written here, we had to acquire the land and then let it rest. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
But why? If that's the case on this particular one, isn't that the case for this entire section?
What are you talking about? The fact that it's only in Israel?
Yeah.
Or what?
Yeah. So if this
It would be
land
true.
resting precept only
So
applies to
that's the
while you're
hard one. Yeah. So you have the Sod, remember, you have the Derosh, you have the Remez, and you have the Peshat. So at the Peshat level, it is. It is only in Israel. Well, I mean, no one has Hebrew slaves, and the jurisprudence is not structured that way in Israel today anyway.
all right, that's true.
No, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you couldn't all right, so let's try to go through some of these and see if that test would apply.
What happened?
Well, we're looking through these to see if, okay, so there's this one about like a fire breaks out, yeah, that became the basis of common law, right? If a fire started and then it spreads to the other guy's field, you have to restore that.
Mm-hmm.
That's common law. You know what I mean? That's not going to be tied to only the land of Israel, because there's nothing in there that attaches that legal principle. What I'm trying to say is the legal principle is general. It's the same thing with cursing and killing, and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, how is the normal person supposed to know if it applies to the land of Israel only, or?
It's actually the exception. Well, okay, yeah. So that's where the education is super important, and that's why we're doing Torah Topics, is to bring out this truth. That's why we're doing it. It's really a great question.
I know that there are a lot of times when mitzvot is given, it'll specify when you go into the land.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
You can automatically correlate that specific mitzvot with the land of Israel.
Yeah.
But so I'm sure there are others that may be tied to the land of Israel that don't have that opening. So I don't know how to distinguish those.
If we were stranded on, heaven forbid, on some island, somewhere, and we only had a fraction of the Torah scroll, and this was all we had, it would be hard to answer that question. But other passages that develop the topic will typically have a qualifier in it, like Daniel's referring to, that makes it, oh, it's replying to the land when they cross over into it, right? And this is one of them. That's it's other verses that bring more
bring it together,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the thing about the Hebrew slave, common sense, I mean, you could say, well, that's only going to apply in Israel as it was chartered under Yehoshua, under Joshua, right?
Yeah.
But this other one about, look at this verse 12, right? So not 12, 9. Then there's this stuff about the ox. These are all parts of the common law. It's a principle of strict liability in the common law.
Yeah.
That's what this has to do with. Actually, that was about the ox. Let me see. I'm trying to find. Liability would also apply in the case of the fire. Right? That's a general principle. A fire is started. Somehow someone lets it get out of control. It goes and damages the neighbor's field.
Mm-hmm.
The one who started the fire must make restitution. This is a really interesting verse 6. This is saying that somebody brings a farm implement or something to your property,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just store it, and something happens and it gets stolen. Well, if they can find the thief has to pay double.
Right.
And if they couldn't find the thief, the owner shall depose or make an oath before Elohim and denying that they benefited from the property, basically. See that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did not send his hand on the business of his neighbor. That's what the Hebrew says. Lo shalach yado b'melechet yarehu. Did not extend out his hand and get benefit from the business of the other guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the oath that he has to make. So these could become the legal formation of any kind of a law system, really. I mean, in the common law, it works that way.
Yeah.
In the common law, you have to have an injured party. That's a whole other discussion. Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we're going over these laws, and there's the podcast I listened to or whatever. The guy was talking about how every single one of these laws can be traced back to one of the 10 Commandments.
Correct.
Right, and
that's
so
a really important idea. That's a super important idea. So let's try to do that.
Well,
go ahead.
Before we go any further, the thought that I had didn't end there. It progressed a little bit. Another way to say that is all 613 mitzvot that are in this section and in others hinges on the 10 Commandments.
Correct.
And then
that is a correct statement.
And then in the New Testament, you have Jesus saying something very similar, that all of the commandments hinge on loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and loving your neighbor as yourself. And the church approaches the law by saying, oh, well, we just love God and love our neighbor, and that's the beginning and end of what it all means. And it's like,
but there's a defect. There's a defect in that.
There is, because it's a distortion of what all the. So how would you know, for example, about I don't know if what's a good example? The fire. How do you know to make restitution? Well,
you go. How about this? You go store
these are
store your mower at somebody else's house, and it disappears.
right.
Right.
Well, let's suppose let's look at these specific 613 mitzvot as the specified manner in which to live out those two precepts of loving God and loving man. These are the ways in which you are to do it. And they're like, no, we don't like those ways. We're gonna fulfill that in our own ways and forget about the ways that God said you do it in that manner.
It's too much work to learn all that, and it's too complex, and I don't want to invest the effort. I just want to go by how I feel about it. I mean, that's really actually what we're dealing with.
Yeah, that's what it is. And I mean, the more I'm thinking about it, the clearer it's getting that that's what we're doing. But yeah.
Right. So this is a good example that it generalizes as a rule or regulation for commerce and doing business and interaction between parties, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a similar circumstance in verse 9. It says, when anybody gives to another a chamor, it's a donkey or an ass, an ox, a sheep, or any other animal to keep it.
Like babysit. Dog.
Right, babies. Yeah, dog sit. And if, heaven forbid, it dies or it's injured or it's carried off with no witnesses that saw it, then they have to make this oath right here. Mm-hmm. That the one has not laid hands on the property of the other. And then the owner must they have no, what's called no
grounds for suing.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's no cause of action. They do not have a legal cause of action. That's what that is.
Yeah.
And then no restitution is to be made.
Mm-hmm.
There are very interesting things. This one, I think this one is like super interesting.
So this is really, sorry, going back. I'm
that's fine.
Thinking through the process, and it's like this is very much kind of based on the honor system.
I had a circumstance like that where a piece of machinery was left at the property there, and something happened to it. It disappeared, and I had no idea what happened to it. So I mean, I had to follow this in that case. So I don't know if you may have heard about that, but
it was really weird.
It disappeared.
You want to discuss it after the podcast?
Yeah, let's do that after, just because the summary was that it was brought. It was being stored at the property there. I did get some use out of it, and it worked, and it didn't break while I was using it. And then it was sitting there, just being stored. And it disappeared. I'm like, what happened to it? We didn't know.
All right.
So there was a controversy over that. What happened to that? The owner felt that I should be responsible for it. But I said, look, I'll make an oath before God that I didn't sell that thing.
Oh, I thought I was taking it kind of the reverse. I thought you had something here.
No.
Then
somebody.
And it was being stored, and we moved in, and you asked Gary to find it or something, and it was gone or something.
Oh no. No, this has been like over probably 10 years ago.
Okay. I was thinking maybe I can go look for it at some point tomorrow, but I guess
if that were the case, I'd let you know, but it's nothing like that. No, this was a case where an implement, machinery was being stored on that property, and after I was done using it for a short time, it sat there and sat there. It was being, just like this. It was being guarded at my property.
Yeah.
But something happened to it. It disappeared. That's all. So it's a controversy over whether I should be responsible for that. And I said the scripture doesn't hold me responsible for that.
Now, there is a distinction if they're paying you, right? Because then you are
correct. That is there's a whole section in the Gemara. It's extremely detailed and quite robust that deals with this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And that question's a big one. Is if you are receiving payment for like a payment for storage, then you are responsible. Yes.
All right.
Yeah. This is way too much to cover in the time we have.
Definitely.
But I found this very interesting. The verse 13. So if you borrow something, this word means if a person borrows from his neighbor and it becomes broken or dies, and the owner is not with it, right? Then you got to pay for it. So always be careful when you're borrowing some machinery or any kind of car or anything.
Make sure they're with you when it breaks.
Or be prepared to fix it if it breaks on your watch. If it breaks when you have that thing.
Yeah.
This scripture in verse 13 is explicit. You're going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an animal that dies or if it's a machinery that breaks. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting, I mean, it's explicitly clear. Then it goes on to say, if the owner was together with it, then you don't have to pay for it.
The idea that if you're misusing it, they had the responsibility of saying, hey, this is how you properly use it.
That's exactly right. That's the principle. Yeah, but if you did have, it says if it had a price that you were paying for it, you still have to pay that price. So there's a lot more detail here than we can't even. This is the surface only we're dealing with, and that's just on contracts and for storage and for rentals. Machinery moving, that kind of thing. I mean, then there's a whole other category of this. Think about this. Let's say you were paying for a moving service, right? You probably wouldn't really do that. But if you paid for a moving service and something happened and something was damaged in the moving,
right?
According to that, you were still required to pay the movers, right? So they damaged your couch or some kind of furniture or something. And that's the kind of legal stuff that we're getting into here, right? Where the Torah makes it clear, right? Do you have the right to not pay them because they damaged your? See, a lot of people would think that.
It's kind of like these are honest questions, like who owes who for what. And it's not exactly a common sense thing because both parties kind of have a claim to make.
Yes, it's not that simple. That's why you can't go by. Go ahead. Yeah.
That's what I was about to say is the idea of, well, it's all wrapped up in these two precepts. So as long as I follow these two precepts, I'm basically fulfilling the law. That's wrong, because the Torah is making a judgment call in these scenarios that are not common sense or easy to see. Right. And if you haven't studied it, if you don't know it, and you're just going with your gut and being led by those two principles, then all depth of what you're doing is suddenly shallow. because there's already a judgment call and you're ignoring it.
Right. So there was this, I don't know if anybody would even know this now, but years ago there was some kind of a thing called Kumbaya.
No,
We're gonna sit around and sing Kumbaya. You know what I mean? That's to love your neighbors.
It's funny that
It's
you
like,
bring that up, because that song came up in my mind this past week. I don't know why, but a lot of times I'll think about how we got, like, why do we say things the way we do? And if I understand the song correctly, the Kumbaya is supposed to mean "Come, my Lord." And then I realized Yah is like an abbreviation of, how people say Yahweh, and come by Yah, kumbaya. I think
I
that's
don't even, right.
I
I
think
don't
that's
even think
where it came
there's
from.
that. So I don't even think it's even that complex. It was kind of it's associated with, everybody get along, it's happy times. We're just a big community. We're, hippies or whatever. you know, that's the connotation that it has.
Well, I do tend to overthink everything, so.
Well, there may be something to what you're saying, but as far as the common vernacular, it's like, don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
That's a saying, right? That's a saying because of one thing that happened,
Yeah.
right? So sing kumbaya is a saying that means you're kind of wistfully ignorant of what's going on. You're not really paying attention to anything like business. That's what it means, at least in the common. That's the way I was using it. And so to not pay attention to business and what's going on, and how is that going to love your neighbor as yourself when you're being ignorant of these things, right? That's what we're trying to point out.
Right.
Verse 17 is verse 17. Did Karina go?
She did.
Did she go?
Yeah, she had to take
Okay.
to the birthday.
Because I was gonna point out about her question. Her question was, how do you know what applies in the land of Israel?
Well, she's gonna listen to the podcast. I
All
imagine
right.
she normally does. So
This one applies to the land of Israel, but it's really good advice for any nation. It would be very good advice to discourage witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 17.
Yeah, you're
Right.
not to tolerate a sorceress. But a sorcerer is okay, right? It's just no. Oh, okay. I guess not.
There is another. That's where this is a good example of the idea of these forbidden practices is expanded on in other passages. So you have to take it all together,
Right.
and find a list of wizards and necromancers and
That's the problem.
spiritual mediums and write all those people. This is added. You could say that this term incorporates all those. It refers to all those, not just like one woman who wants to make potions to do things.
Right.
Magic, right? Yeah, right. It's not just It's not only including that. So it's a good application of this, as really it would be good advice to have an official policy against this.
Yeah.
Which is what the scripture says. And the reason why is because these people, it's hard to find the words to explain this, but they're manipulating the channels of nature.
Uh-huh.
right?
Fabric of reality.
Yes, they are. They're distorting and bringing impurity into it by doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're some of the most tame individuals that there are. Tame is impure,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's because of the forces they're working with. So
Right.
anyway, that's some of the reason behind it's the rationale behind this. How about this one? What do you think about this one? So if you decide to lend money, do not act toward them as like a banker, creditor. Lo tasimon alav neshech. Do not be putting upon them usury.
Do I know how I feel about that?
Yeah, well, then.
I
Let's talk about that.
I have done an awful lot of study through the Mises Institute.
Yeah.
And so, I'm really big on Austrian economics and such. And that side of me is a little pained by this. But I think the premise of this here, because in the end, as a business, the point of the business is to make money. But the purpose of the law is not to make money. The purpose of the law is to live justly and right. And so this is a contrast to the principles of making money in a business through with an economic perspective and things. It's forcing. I'm trying to think of the right way to say it. It's almost like I have to force myself in with my economic perspective into acknowledging that there's something greater than money and greater than the economics of it. And that would be the thing that's greater would be the justice and the mercy involved that's wrapped up in the law.
That's a good answer. And that'll be sufficient. There are two different parts. Yeah.
I'm good
sufficient.
at coming up with those,
Yeah, that was actually good though.
Oh, thank you for saying it like that was actually good. Yeah.
So I mean, it's like it's oppressive to the person. In the word, if you even see it in English, to the poor person. It's like the lottery, that's a tax on stupidity. And mostly it's like slow or low, what do you call them? People on the bottom, the bottom economic scale people are the ones buying those lottery tickets.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a form of oppression of the poor. And this is the same thing. It's that kind of a motivation that's resident here in verse 24. But there's another part of it too. As far as like the spiritual reasoning for why this would be. What you want is there's a lot to say about this verse because it actually does not in this verse encourage making the loans.
Really?
The Torah does not actually encourage it. No.
I mean, this verse, no, but I thought the Torah said that.
You're right. It says, "Give to your neighbor, open your hand wide." Is that the verse you're thinking of?
Well, no, I don't think that's the verse I'm thinking of, but it's something along those lines where, like, even if it's year number 6, right before the year of Jubilee, when all debts are forgiven, make the loan. So
the reason for that is it's
as a creditor, I'd be very disheartened in that business scheme on year number 6 and even 5.
So The Torah, this is a little more of an esoteric approach.
Mm-hmm.
Because money lending can be vastly profitable.
Yeah.
That's actually a danger. It's a pitfall because it disinclines the heart away. It disinclines the heart from dependence on Hashem to dependence on your own money making skill. That's the other reason that's behind this.
Okay. So
It's because it is so profitable.
It reorients your dependence from self to God.
Correct. Because you don't have to do any work. You sit back and track ledgers. That's all you got to do. Get it? Yes. What you said is correct. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, you're good. No, that's good.
It does redirect and reorient it, your confidence or your, what you call it, dependence.
Yeah.
On your ledgers and your money instead of dependence on heaven. That's the danger when you're on the lending side.
Correctly.
That's part of the reason for this.
Yeah.
Part of the reason is it oppresses the poor. Part of the reason is it's higher spiritual truth to teach the poor guy how to get out of being poor instead of profiting from it. That's a third reason.
Yeah, also I feel like there's this goal, might be the word, not really though. This I feel like God is trying to set up the system to minimize the poor in his kingdom. And if all debts are forgiven on year number 7, then everyone has a clean slate, and I feel like that might be like one of the driving factors for that.
Nobody is homeless. Nobody's without a property after year 49. Yes, in the worst case scenario. It is definitely rescuing people from that oppression.
Right. It's almost like a video game versus real life, where if you die, you can just respawn or whatever.
You can respawn in the game. Yes, that's a good analogy. So the Shemitah, right? It's an economic respawn.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, I'm not a gamer, but I've got a lot of friends who are. So.
Well, you can see it. That's what happens. They're going around fighting, and all of a sudden they're, looking at the buildings, the tops.
Game over, man. Game over.
Game over, yeah. Anyway, that's a really interesting verse, and there's quite a bit of depth behind that. Oh, the Rashi. I think the Rashi I was looking for last week.
Yeah, it came up this time.
It was in this one. I think it was this one. This, you cast it to the dogs.
Yeah.
Remember?
No, I remember. Yeah, we were looking for it, and you clicked on Talmud instead of commentary. There you go. As well the dog.
Yeah, right here. The dog is entitled to reward because it is stated in Exodus 11, verse 7, but against the children of Israel, not a dog moved his tongue. And this happened, the Holy One, blessed be he, said, give it the reward it deserves. There was a Rashi about that. Remember I mentioned it. Because the dogs were well behaved on the night of the Passover.
Yeah.
We couldn't find it, but that's it right there.
Yeah, I remember. And when I came across it, I was like, that's the one he was looking for.
Yeah, good for you. It's awesome that you found it. Yes, I knew there was a Rashi on that, and I'm ready to believe it. I don't really have a problem with it because why does it mention it in Exodus 11 verse 7?
Unless it was to give honor to the dog.
Right, the dogs. got some kind of merit out of that.
Yeah.
All right, we'll stop that. There are so many. I think this had like some number of like 72 different laws in it. I think there's a bunch. That's
Yeah,
a number. What's
what
that?
was it? They gave the number. I think it might have been in the 70s, but I feel like it was in either the 60s or the 80s. The number of mitzvot given here.
Yes.
Out of the total 613. It's funny when you think about how, we're coming from this. I'm going to start using the word church culture. It's a little nicer than churchy church,
Yeah, churchy thought. Yeah, churchy
Yeah.
thought. I mean, it depends on where you are in the spectrum.
Right.
Once you get past it, I assure you, listeners, once you come up and elevate with the Torah, you will see exactly why we said it that way.
Yeah.
You look back and say,
you
oh,
know,
that was kind of churchy.
For those who haven't reached it, when I was in the church culture, I would have this thing that I called TOG, which is time alone with God, where I go and I read my Bible by myself and I pray and I have a little journal that I sometimes journal in. And I thought my whole life was God oriented. And then my wife and I, when we started on this journey and we're actually reading the Torah and like divorcing it from everything we've ever been told about it. We're just reading it for what it says. We're following the feasts and festivals. It's almost what I thought was God oriented was like a drop in the bucket. And now it's more of a like my life is saturated in it, sort of.
Can you see the difference where, let's say, what you thought at one time was, wow, I had to admit, myself, I'm getting up there, I'm pretty lofty, like I'm high spiritually or whatever. I mean, can you actually see now that bringing the Torah in had a much higher elevation effect?
Yeah.
Over what you were then, right? Even though then you thought I got this. You know what I mean? I'm not.
But my point, though, like that's all true. But my point is that back then, we're taught. I looked at the law and I was like, it's a point of death. It's a point of
judgment.
Form of slavery, essentially. But the more you try to live by it, the more life you have. And it's not just like earthly life, but the more God-oriented your life becomes. And that's, I don't know why suddenly I felt like, I should probably say something along those lines, but
what happens is that you can see it in others as you go on with this, and you just start to see it in people who haven't fully incorporated and fully adopted, or what's the word, fully embraced, Torah as a goal and a vision for who you are and what you believe, what you do. It becomes something that holds you down. That idea, it actually holds you down spiritually. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah.
If you can actually tell, it was elevating.
It is very
spiritual. Elevating is a certain, if you go to the Psalms, these Psalms are called through like 120 through 130. I don't remember exactly. The Psalms of ascent, right? Going up. It's that spiritual notion that we're talking about. Okay. And the Psalms will help with that process of elevation spiritually, but you must have the Torah as the foundation. You must have it. And
Yeah.
that's what we're here to proclaim. That's what we're teaching and explaining how to get on this road and really succeed and prosper with it. And if you want a verse for that, we talked about that word. I don't know if maybe that was in the other group, the Hebrew reading team, the word that means success. We didn't talk about that, did we?
That does not sound
All right, so prosper. Let me spell it right. Deuteronomy 6, verse 24, Deuteronomy 28:63. Either one of these will work. Because, oops. I don't know why it wouldn't let me get to that. What did I say? 28:63.
No.
That's not the right one, is it? I see. It's comparing it.
Yeah, so this is saying that, God had made you prosperous, and now he's going to shove you into the ground.
That would be if you, heaven forbid, you turn aside from, you abandon, neglect,
You
turn your face against the Torah, right?
Right.
Then you can expect these things to happen. That's the famous Deuteronomy 29. So where was that? That was 6:24. That's still not the one I'm looking for. That we might always prosper? Really? Le chayitenu. So how do we get on that again? We were talking about yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not entirely sure about what you're trying to find. I was thinking about how the law, instead of bringing death into my life, as I've been told it would my whole life, has brought life itself into my life.
Right, I was going to find a good verse to support that, so it would be a source verse for that very thought. That's what this was.
Torah,
right? Yeah. Let's see what they come up with. Doesn't let me change it. It's stuck on NIV for some reason.
Well, that's annoying. Torah of life.
If you took, in a general abstract sense, you could just take Deuteronomy 28 and be the source, because basically there's a whole big long list of blessings that arise from. It says if you obey, right, Yud Vav He, observe faithfully the divine commandments, Lishmor Lasot et Kol Mitzvotav, all his mitzvot, that I am commanding you today, then Adonai will set you high. Look at that, above all the nations of the earth. It's a parallel idea, right?
Yeah.
These blessings shall come upon you and take effect, but if you will but heed, and just simply heed the word of
Adonai.
Adonai, yeah. This says Kitishma B'Kol, if you will hear the voice of Adonai your God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then here they go. We're going to roll them out, right? Baruch atah ba'ir, Baruch atah b'sadeh, right? So you'll be blessed in the city and blessed out in the field.
You know what else is funny about all this? Is
Yeah.
the church claims all of these promises without
It is odd.
any of the quid pro quo.
Quid pro quo is the correct legal term.
Right, without the responsibility. I'm going to reap the benefits without sowing the works. I've got the faith without the works, and somehow say it's not dead.
It's all true. That's what this program, that's what our effort here is about, setting forth to change. That this word is immutable. God is the same as it's written yesterday, today, and always. He does not change. This covenant is perpetual. It's unchanging.
It's funny because I know I keep contrasting with church culture, but it's like they will agree God is unchanging and he's yesterday, today, forever. But at the same time, with the same breath, they will claim that all the things that God has said in the past no longer apply, and these are the only things that apply. So when God said this is an eternal ordinance, was he lying to them? Is he lying to us now? Or do we not understand what the Bible really says? Those are the only three options.
It's a common problem, and we'll use the nicer phrase, the church culture just has this way of
shutting their
it's a selective reading.
Yeah.
Right? Because in this, the first verse says, if you will diligently hearken to these mitzvot, which means you have to learn them first. Mm-hmm. How would you pay attention to them and keep them if you don't even know them?
Yeah.
So anyway, if you'll do that process, then I'll see to it that you're blessed in the city and you're blessed in the field. You're blessed in the basket. I think in the store, you're blessed in the soil, the offspring, your cattle, the kneading bowl, and comings and your goings, right? All this stuff. I mean, quite a list there. Yes.
But they have and not the tail.
you trying to think of how to make this the most effective use of words. Do not believe the preaching you've heard that just lifts things up out of context. Learn how to put those words that are preached into the correct context of when they were said and when they were given. These words are given to Israel by Moses, in his last work, his last talk, his last preaching, if you want to call it that, on earth before he goes up, and that's the end of his life. It's his last final finale of what he's doing on earth, and he's inaugurating. He's kind of inaugurating. He's bringing to bear all the terms of this covenant. Israel, if you will follow these commands, if you'll follow this Torah, you can expect these blessings. And if you turn aside and don't follow, you can expect these bad things. That's the proper context to understand this. I think that's enough. I think that explained it. It's a simple exercise. Read verse 1 of chapter 28 and contemplate what that means.
Indeed.
Okay. Wow. Did Karina have any other specific questions, or did you on this one?
If Karina had some, she did not mention them to me.
Yeah.
And I know we kind of already touched it a little bit, but I feel like you wanted to go further, and I would like to go further in how each of the 613 mitzvot can be.
Oh yeah, let's cover that real quick, and then we're being pretty much ready for a break.
Yeah.
So what you can do in this, okay, I'll just kind of explain this in like lecture terms, the 10 commandments, they're called this, but the Hebrew does not say the 10 mitzvot.
It's the 10 sayings, isn't it?
It does, yes. They're the Seret Devarim. So the davar are words, right? The 10 words, or the 10 sayings, or the 10 utterances, if you want to be, like poetic. The better way to think of them is really what they are the 10 categories. In our culture, that translation works better. There are 10 precept categories that are each attached to a commandment itself. So you have one mitzvah for each of the 10, or one statute or one commandment for each of the 10, that also at the same time represents a category that all the other commandments fit into.
Right.
We do not have the time, but we could actually go through this entire parsha line by line, and we could determine which category they fit. I'll do a couple just as an exercise. What's that?
Is it accurate to look at how, and I think I heard this from Rabbi Daniel Lapin, I believe.
Okay.
There's this idea that the first 5 on one tablet of the sayings or utterances deal with your relationship with God.
Very good. Correct.
Is dealing with your relationship with man.
Yes, right? That's correct. So the first 5.
I'm just pointing out the correlation of that concept with what Jesus said. He wasn't saying simply love God and man. He was saying fulfill the entirety of the tablets within the 613 mitzvot. Because he's saying love God, the first 5 utterances, and love man, the second set of 5 utterances.
Right. So that means that there's a childish way to think about the 10 commandments. Right. I have kept the 10 commandments since my youth was one of the responses that Yeshua got back.
Right.
It is childish. You can do that, and you should be applauded. You should do that. But there's more to it than that. The more it's elevated, it's a more insightful and wiser and more prudent understanding is to recognize that if you say, I keep the 10 mitzvot, the 10 commandments, you're really saying that I am vigilant in each of these categories
Right.
of mishpat, each of these categories I'm aware of in my dealings.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So let's do a few. Just see if we can attach it to one of the 10 commandments, right? As a category. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, that person shall serve 6 years and shall go free in the 7th year without payment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. What mitzvot in the 10 commandments apply in this one? Well, you can easily see it coming there's more than one, you can say that.
It does seem like I imagine several of the mishpatah or mitzvots would have multiple categories.
They do. This one does. Because the Hebrew people are chosen of Hashem, actually the first verse applies. That I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage.
Mm-hmm.
See that? Out of the house of slavery. So I don't want these people continuing being slaves. So in a sense, that very first mitzvah, you shall have no other gods before me. Right? Actually, you can fit this in that category for sure. And another one you can fit in this category is you could take the stealing, right? Thou shalt not
Mm-hmm.
rob, cheat, and steal, right? You
Right.
might be able to find the fault bearing false witness in this one. And another one where you can find this is, or I'm sure that's in this verse, is thou shalt not covet the other guy's property, right? So motivationally, there's a limit to this free work you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
Indentured servitude. So
Right.
we've come up with 2 or 3 different categories that you can put these in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, let's try another one. These all go together. The 2, verse 2, 3, 4.
Right. Like the first, I mean, these are sections of the code.
Right. Yeah, these are sections of the code. So this entire section, all those 10 or categories of the 10 commandments apply.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you can tell when he gets to this verse and he says, well, I really like my servitude. There's something wrong with this. There's really something wrong with his soul. He's not on the path that
Because
Hashem wants, right?
he would prefer his cage over the freedom that God has given him.
Correct. He is preferring some other expression of life besides what the Creator has imagined or has given him. Yes, that's right. So we'll skip on past the servant part. Let's see if we can do another one. How about this one, verse 12? The makeh ish vamet mot yomat. So a hitter of a person that causes them to die will be put to death, right? So we're going to talk about some categories there.
So this is not the same as an accidental death, right? Because
Oh no, this is not accidental, right? This is a
murder.
This is a right. This is a an intentional homicide, right?
Yeah.
No, verse 12 is dealing with that.
This is obviously thou shalt not murder. Then there's one.
Yeah, right. There's a real obvious one. Can you guess, boys, girls, what that would be? Yes, thou shalt not kill, right? Lo tirtzach.
Thou shalt not murder. Is there any others?
Well, you see, you have to look at the
Possibly,
motive.
possibly the coveting.
I think that you're right about that. It's buried in, it's subtle, but it's in there.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the motive for why it was done, right? But a lot of times it does have a passion, maybe for a wife, heaven forbid, or some material things or some money or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, then that's a form of stealing as well. So there would be a third category. And then the fourth category that this fits in is that the person is made in the image and likeness of God. So it's violating the respect that's due to the creation in that way.
Yeah.
Because made in the image and likeness of Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
I am the Lord your God, right? Anochi Hashem Elohecha. So that's a quick, there's probably more to it than that. The real pashat is that it's violating the command, thou shalt not murder.
Pretty obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's real obvious. The exclusion you talked about is hinted at here. It's if they did so, but not by intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Then I will assign you a place. That was the escaped cities, right? The cities of refuge. So the question you had comes in the next verse, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way I read verse 13 is that, okay, it wasn't really the kind of intentional homicide that, with motive, but it's still bringing bad upon an image and likeness of Hashem, so it's in violation of that first commandment right there. And you don't know about these other ones we looked at, but probably not, because the motive wasn't there other than, let me think, if he's acting carelessly, if a person is acting in a very careless manner that leads to an accident, right?
Right. So he's herding a bull, and
Yeah.
the bull goes out and skewers his neighbor who's watching or something.
Right. Yes.
And he was careless because he didn't warn the neighbor. He didn't have a fence up, or he was walking in a way that was, too close to his neighbor's property or whatever. That
Yes.
was unintentional killing that he's still in some way liable for.
He's related to it. He's connected to it, like that roof scenario where he failed to put the barrier up.
Yeah.
So which commandment is that one, right? So we can see it in the first commandment, right? Because it's that the person was made in the image and likeness of Hashem. And so it's who is Hashem? It's coming in under the first category. I don't know if I'm trying to think of, could there be any others? If a person acts carelessly in that way, it's a form of like hyper selfish that they don't really care about other people and stuff. They're not interested in other people's lives.
Right.
So even though it's not in the 10 commandments, remember, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. It is definitely violating that one.
Mm-hmm.
And where that one fits in the 10 commandments is a bit of a challenge, other than it being with the first one. Let me think how you relate to, it's not the Sabbath, it's not bearing, is it a false witness? Maybe. Is it a form of coveting? Sort of. So we can work on that one.
Yeah.
Right? All right, so this is verse 15. It says that if you strike your father or mother, mot yumad, be put to death. Well, honor your father or mother, right?
Right.
And of course
Obviously.
that's right.
That's also well, not necessarily. It doesn't say he strikes his father or mother until they're dead, but I was gonna say it would violate the thou shalt not murder, but it's like
It is violating that, even if it's not all the way to that extent. It is violating that because it's doing the opposite of what you're called to do, and it's doing it with yeah.
Hold on one moment.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Someone came by and had mail for me.
All right, let's go back to that one about borrowing something. Right. So if we talked about this one earlier, if a person borrows a animal or a thing from another, and then it's broken or it dies, and the owner is not with it, he must pay for that thing, right?
Right.
The animal, even, whatever. So let's see which of the 10 commandments as treated as categories, right? The 10 commandments, the 10 categories, does this fit under? Well, steal, right? Thou shalt not steal property.
Thou shalt not. Yeah. Covet.
Covet, I think you can see that too, right?
Yeah.
You borrowed it because you coveted it. Yeah. So coveting and stealing.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these are dealing with oaths, and as soon as you get into the oath, you'll have the false testimony as a mitzvah, as a category, right?
Yeah.
Right. So we have 2 categories for this one about the borrowing. There could be more. How about this one, verse 17?
Shall not tolerate a sorceress.
Right. Just
For one.
so which category do we have there?
Category number 1.
Have no other gods before me. That's it.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Like pretty obvious. Pretty outstanding.
Is there any of the dealing with people? Remember, there are 5 that deal with the other people and 5 that deal with Hashem. Like it's.
So I feel like when a sorcerer or sorceress is tampering with the fabric of reality, one of the natural responses that creation has to that is cursing and death, right? And
Yes.
so you're not being mindful of. I'm not sure how to say what I'm thinking. You're harming the people around you when you're practicing witchcraft, and you may not even realize it.
You are. So, if nothing else, it would fall into the category of coveting. Because whatever it is that you're trying, this outcome that you're trying to get, you're putting that as something you want above whatever is proper.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would do, I would say. So you can see we did a couple just as a test experiment.
Yeah.
I'll try 28 just for interesting, just as a project. This is the overflow. Dimacha lo te'acher. It's like you shall not be lazy almost about the first fruit, the first yield of your, they're saying vats, some kind of container.
Yeah.
And then this is the Bechor, the firstborn of your sons will be mine, right?
I thought
What's
that
this
was
one?
the purpose of the Levites to take the place.
Yeah, you're right. That's a technicality. You are correct, but this is also correct. That happens later.
David, he is correct, and he is correct. They can't both be correct. You are also correct.
So in this time, you have to see it as an unfolding, and at the point in time when this happened, it was correct. But
Okay, so
there was a later arrangement made for Levi.
Levitical priesthood had not been established yet.
That's the answer. That is the correct answer. So what category can we put this one in as a final just exercise here?
Let's see. Well, by giving God your first fruits, you're acknowledging that He is God.
Correct.
So that would fall under number 1.
That comes under 1, correct.
For sure.
And then there's one more I see. There is one more.
What's your one? Your one more.
Remember, the commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it sanctified or holy.
Yes.
But that represents a whole category. That's a whole category of mitzvot that are of this type, that the first fruits and the tithe and the firstborn are dedicated to Hashem. So the commandment of remember, it's keeping the Sabbath day falls in under that category as well, because it's dealing with that principle. So,
okay. I got you.
Remember the Sabbath day, it refers to the tithe, the 10%, the firstborn, right? The bikurim, the bringing of the offerings. It refers to all of those.
Almost
Actually,
a ritual.
Yes, the moedim, the keeping the festivals, all of those. It's a category that represents all of that.
I got you.
So that's how this fits into that category, plus the number 1 that you said.
Cool.
So for the listeners, that is Exodus 22, verse 28. The first yield of the containers and the firstborn of your children. The same on verse 29. Be the same 2 categories.
7 days, the firstborn shall remain with its mother. On the 8th day, you shall give it to me.
Right. Now I got curious about verse 30, actually.
Shall be holy people to me. You shall not eat flesh torn by beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs.
Right, we learned about this earlier, why the dogs get it, but we didn't talk about the category this fits under. I would put all the kashrut and all of the dividing clean from unclean on food or meat, right? Is still under that commandment of the honor the Sabbath. It's still under that. Yes. So this one, yes, this is. Yeah, go ahead. So that would be the same 2 categories right there.
Mm-hmm.
False rumors, that would be bad testimony against your neighbor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not join hands with the guilty to act as a malicious witness, same exact category. It's a good exercise to learn how to actually try to do those. And we can, we can work on this because some are easy. Some of them are a lot harder
Yeah.
to do. It takes a while to really get the notion and understanding.
For sure.
Wow. Okay. I think we're getting close to ready for a break here. So
Yeah.
how do we wrap up the program? How do you want to do that?
I've given some thought to that, and I really don't know. I want to have probably some sort of an automated, we'd record, hey, this is Torah Topics and blah, blah, blah. And then for the end of it, thank you for listening, blah, 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 but I haven't really scripted anything out yet, so it's still in the works.
You just listened to another Torah Topics. Right?
Listen, guys. Goodbye so long.
Something will be figured out.
Yes,
We'll get
sir.
something.
All right. Well, I believe that's it. You have a good one, David.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Shabbat shalom. Good questions. Good topics. Good review. And let me end the screen share. Confirm there. See if I can make any more comment about this parsha. The main point is, think about Mishpatim as really the first big entry into actual, can you find a word? Laws, regulations, codes for behavior, very specific. You're dealing with specifics. And that's just repeating what we said to review. And until next time, we'll just say shalom.
Shalom.